The Whitaker estate, perched on a hill overlooking the glittering skyline of Manhattan, gleamed with lights on a cool autumn evening. Luxury cars lined up at the wrought iron gates, where New York's upper-class members stepped out, their evening gowns and tailored suits shimmering under the glow of crystal chandeliers high above. The gentle sound of jazz music filled the air, blending with bursts of laughter and the clinking of wine glasses. This was James Whitaker's stage, a 35-year-old white millionaire who knew how to turn every event into a display of power. James stood in the grand foyer, tall in a perfectly tailored black suit, his blonde hair slicked back, revealing piercing blue eyes. He held a glass of champagne, his gaze sweeping over the crowd like a king surveying his kingdom. Around him, wealthy and influential friends gathered, engrossed in conversations about stocks, yachts, and hunting trips in Africa. But James wasn't listening. He relished the feeling of control, the sensation of every eye fixed on him. And tonight, he was at the peak of attention. Ethan Hayes, James's longtime friend, approached with his signature half-smile. Ethan, a venture capitalist with tousled brown hair and mischievous eyes, constantly stirred things up. He held a glass of red wine, swirling it slightly, and stopped just before James, his eyes gleaming with challenge. "You look pleased with yourself, James," Ethan said with a hint of sarcasm, "as if the whole world belongs to you." James raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a smug smile. "Doesn't it?" he replied, voice low and confident. "Money buys everything, Ethan, from the fastest cars to the most agreeable opinions. You know that." The crowd around them quieted slightly, sensing a tension beginning to form. Ethan tilted his head, pretending to consider James's words, though a glint of danger flashed in his eyes. "Easy to say when you are surrounded by people who nod at everything you say," Ethan replied, his voice low but sharp. "But would you dare to prove it? Prove that your money can buy anything, even things that don't belong to this world." James set his champagne glass on a nearby table, folding his arms across his chest, his gaze narrowing. "And how exactly do you want me to prove that? Name your price, Ethan. You know I never walk away from a challenge." Ethan's smile widened, though it wasn't a friendly one. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "I bet $5 million that you can't marry someone completely outside our class. Someone who doesn't belong to this world, who doesn't meet your beauty standards or your taste. And more than that, you must live with her for 3 months, convince the whole world the marriage is real, and turn her into a part of high society." Soft chuckles rippled from a few guests, but most remained silent, waiting for James's reaction. He let out a short laugh, though there was no joy in his eyes. "You're joking, right? Marry someone outside my circle? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." Ethan didn't flinch. He slowly looked around the room, his eyes landing on a far corner where Lena Carter, a newly hired maid, was quietly moving through the crowd. Lena, a 28-year-old black woman, wore a simple black and white uniform, her natural curls neatly tied at the back. She carried a silver tray of champagne glasses, moving with a graceful awareness, trying to remain unnoticed in the backdrop of the party. Her brown eyes were cast down, and she was focused on her task as if she knew her presence didn't belong in this world. "What?" Ethan said provocatively, pointing toward Lena. "There, your maid. Not your type, not part of this world. She's the perfect choice for the bet." James followed Ethan's gesture, his gaze landing on Lena. He frowned, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. Lena was unlike anyone in his social sphere. She lacked the glamorous appearance of the models he usually brought to events, and the haughty confidence of high society women. But something about her, Perhaps her calm demeanor or the way she worked without seeking attention stirred a sense of challenge in James. "You've lost your mind," James said coldly. "Marry a maid? You couldn't even come up with something more absurd." Ethan stepped closer, his smile sharper now. "What's the matter, James? Afraid to lose? You always say money can buy everything. If that's true, this should be easy. Or are you worried that even James Whitaker can't control everything this time?" The crowd began to murmur, curious eyes turning toward James. He felt the pressure mounting, not just from Ethan, but everyone around, all waiting for him to prove his invincible status. His pride flared like a fire in his chest. He couldn't appear weak or let Ethan or anyone else think he'd back down. James smirked, locking eyes with Ethan. "Fine," he said, voice deep and dangerous. 3 months. I'll marry her, make her part of this world, and shut all of you up. Get your wallet ready, Ethan." Ethan laughed aloud, but his smile couldn't hide his satisfaction. He extended his hand, and James took it firmly, as if sealing an invisible contract. "This will be fun," Ethan said with biting sarcasm. "But remember, James, I want to see her at your side at events, dressed like a high society lady, and the world must believe you love her. If you fail, the 5 million is mine." James said nothing. He turned back to look at Lena, who stood in the corner of the room, unaware that a game had just decided her fate between powerful men. She placed the champagne tray down, wiped her hands on her apron, and continued her work with quiet focus. James felt a strange sensation, not his usual confidence, but a flicker of unease. Yet he quickly pushed it aside. This was just a game, and James Whitaker had never lost. As Ethan walked away, disappearing into the crowd with a victorious smile, James picked up his champagne glass and took a long sip. He looked at Lena again. This time, his gaze held not just curiosity, but resolve. The game had begun, and he would make sure he was the one to win it. The next morning, soft sunlight filtered through the large windows of the Whitaker estate, casting a golden glow on the marble floor of the vast kitchen. Lena Carter, dressed in her black and white maid uniform, stood by the sink, her hands swiftly washing the leftover champagne glasses from the night before. Her natural curls were tied neatly under a deep navy silk scarf, and her brown eyes glinted with focus. The steady sound of running water blended with her quiet rhythm, as if the task itself was her way of staying calm in the unfamiliar world of the elite. Lena, 28, was used to working in silence, keeping herself invisible among the wealthy. She had come to New York 3 years ago, hoping to build a better life for her 2 younger brothers, Jamal and Marcus, who were living with Aunt Ruth in a rundown Brooklyn neighborhood. Her mother had died of cancer when she was just 17, and her father had left shortly afterward, leaving Lena with the burden of caring for the family. Years of juggling 2 jobs, waiting tables during the day and cleaning offices at night, had shaped her into a resilient woman, though not without scars. Working at the Whitaker estate was a chance to earn enough, pay Aunt Ruth's medical debt, and hopefully bring her brothers home one day. The sound of firm footsteps on the marble floor broke the silence. Lena turned around, still holding a wet glass, and saw James Whitaker standing at the threshold. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and his icy blue eyes were fixed directly on her. His presence seemed to shrink the room as if the force of his confidence had compressed the air. Lena wiped her hands on her apron, trying to stay composed. "Mr. Whitaker," she said softly but cautiously, "do you need something?" James didn't answer right away. He stepped into the room, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning her as if assessing a piece of merchandise. "Lena," he said, his voice low and steady, "I need to talk to you. About a proposal." Lena frowned, a wave of unease rising inside her. "What kind of proposal, sir?" she asked, setting the glass down in the sink. She wasn't used to James addressing her by name, and how he looked at her, not with the usual disdain of the rich, but with a cold curiosity, put her on guard. James stepped closer, stopping beside the stainless steel kitchen table. He pulled a check from his shirt pocket and placed it on the table with deliberate slowness, as if performing on stage. "I want you to marry me," he said, his tone as calm as discussing a business deal. "It's a fake marriage. It will last 3 months. In return, you'll receive this sum." Lena blinked, not believing what she had just heard. She looked down at the check. The number $500,000 printed boldly, as if dancing before her eyes. Her heart pounded, but not from excitement, from insult. "You're joking," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "This isn't a game, Mr. Whitaker. I'm not a toy for your amusement." James raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "I'm not joking, Lena," he replied coolly. "This is a transaction. You'll be my wife for 3 months, appear at social events, and play the role of a high society lady. After that, we divorce, and you can start your life over with this money. Simple, no strings." Lena laughed, but it wasn't enjoyable. She crossed her arms, her eyes sharp as she stared him down. "Simple? Can you buy me just because I'm a maid? That I don't have any self-respect?" James tilted his head, almost surprised by her resistance. "I know you're struggling," he said, voice lower now, as if trying to reason with her. "The medical bills, your family in Brooklyn. This money could fix all of that. You wouldn't have to fight anymore." His words cut like a blade. Lena felt heat rush to her face, anger swirling with pain. What did he know about her? About the sleepless nights counting every dollar to send to Aunt Ruth? About the time she held Jamal and Marcus, promising to bring them home, only to break down when the court stripped her custody for not meeting the requirements? The image of her 2 brothers, their bright smiles and hopeful eyes, flashed in her mind. She had promised them a home and a future, but debt and injustice kept her trapped. "Lena said you don't know anything about me," trembling but firm. "You think money can buy everything, but not me. I'm not part of your game." James remained silent. His gaze shifted as though he truly saw her for the first time, but he quickly returned to his usual coldness. "This isn't a game, Lena. It's an opportunity. Refuse, and you'll keep living like this, working yourself to exhaustion, never enough to change anything. Accept, and you can give your family what they need. The choice is yours." Lena turned away, looking out the window where sunlight fell over the lush garden of the estate. She thought of Marcus, the 12-year-old who loved to draw, and Jamal, 15, who pretended to be tough but cried secretly, thinking she didn't notice. She thought of Aunt Ruth, who had sacrificed her health to raise them. This money could clear the debts, bring the boys home, and give them a shot at a proper education. But at what cost? Selling her pride? Becoming part of James Whitaker's world, a world she didn't belong to? She turned back, her gaze steely. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I have conditions. You must respect me. No behavior that crosses the boundaries of this contract. I'm doing this for my family, not for you." James nodded, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "Fair enough. We have a deal." He slid the check toward her. "Today, you'll move into a room in the estate. Tomorrow, we go to the registrar's office. I don't like waiting." Lena took the check, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't look at James. She folded it and slipped it into her apron pocket. "I'll play my part," she said quietly but firmly. "But don't expect me to change who I am for you." James said nothing. He turned and walked out of the kitchen with his usual confident stride. But inside, a strange feeling flickered, as if he had just stepped into a game whose rules he didn't fully understand. Lena remained where she was, alone in the quiet kitchen, her hand gripping the edge of the sink. She knew she had just entered a dangerous path, but for Jamal and Marcus, she was willing to take the risk. The afternoon at the Whitaker estate took on an unusual tone. The air in the expansive living room, usually filled with the laughter of high society guests, was now silent, broken only by the soft clicking of suitcases being wheeled in. Lena Carter stood in the center of the room prepared for her, a lavish space with a king-sized bed draped in white silk, deep crimson velvet curtains, and a wardrobe larger than the apartment she once rented in Brooklyn. Light from the crystal chandelier glinted across her face, highlighting the contemplative look in her brown eyes. Lena, no longer in her maid uniform, but in a simple sweater and jeans, felt like she had entered a world where she didn't belong. She placed her worn fabric bag on the floor and looked around warily. Everything here, from the faint scent of lavender to the ticking of an antique grandfather clock, reminded her she didn't belong there. Lena thought of Jamal and Marcus, her two younger brothers, and the $500,000 check tucked safely in her pocket. That's why she was here, she reminded herself. Not for James Whitaker or his glamorous world, but for the promise she made her siblings. A home, a future, a chance to grow up without the burden of poverty she had endured. A sharp knock at the door pulled Lena out of her thoughts. She turned to see a white woman in her 40s enter, her blonde hair pulled into a high bun, piercing blue eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, exuding professionalism and authority. "Lena Carter," she said, her voice low and clear. "I'm Sophia Bennett, a stylist. Mr. Whitaker hired me to transform you." Lena raised an eyebrow, unable to hide her skepticism. "Transform," she repeated, her tone tinged with sarcasm. "Do you mean to make me look like someone who belongs in this world?" Sophia smiled, but it wasn't the arrogant smile Lena had grown used to from the wealthy. It was sincere, almost sympathetic. "I mean, help you feel comfortable in your new role," Sophia replied, stepping into the room and motioning for two assistants who wheeled in a rack full of elegant dresses. "But I won't lie. James Whitaker's world is not easy. They'll scrutinize every move you make, every word you say. My job is to make sure you're prepared." Lena crossed her arms, eyeing Sophia carefully. She wasn't sure she could trust this woman, but something about Sophia, maybe her candor, made Lena slightly less guarded. "I'm not here to impress them," Lena said firmly. "I'm doing this for my family. That's all." Sophia nodded as if she understood. "I respect that. But to survive these 3 months, you'll need to learn to play by their rules, at least on the surface." She gestured toward the rack. "Let's start. We'll pick a few outfits for the upcoming events." Lena reluctantly approached the rack, her fingers brushing against the soft silk and satin fabrics. Each dress was breathtaking, but they felt like costumes, like masks hiding who she was. Sophia picked out an emerald green evening gown adorned with sparkling sequins and handed it to Lena. "Try this one," she said. "It'll highlight your skin tone beautifully." In the dressing room, Lena stood before the mirror, the gown hugging her figure as if custom made. She couldn't deny its beauty, but the reflection staring back at her felt like a stranger. She remembered her childhood days when her mother, a seamstress, would make her simple dresses from leftover fabric. Lena, her mother, would say, "You're a gem and don't need silk or diamonds to shine." But here, in James Whitaker's world, could she still hold on to that truth? When Lena stepped out, Sophia clapped, her eyes lighting up. "Stunning," she said. "You look like a high society lady, but more importantly, you still have the eyes of someone who won't be subdued. That's something they can't teach." Lena offered a faint smile, but a storm of emotions churned inside her. She didn't want to be a lady of high society. She tried to survive the next 3 months, get the money, and return to her brothers. But the way Sophia looked at her, as if she saw something extraordinary, made Lena wonder if she could do more. From the hallway, James Whitaker watched silently. He stood behind the doorframe, his blue eyes tracking Lena as she stood before the mirror, the gown's shimmer catching the contours of her face. He had expected her to look awkward, to bow her head before the extravagance of his world. But Lena stood tall, eyes defiant, even without saying a word. Something about her, a resilience he couldn't explain, made him uneasy. This wasn't part of the plan. James had hired Sophia because she was the best, a stylist who had worked with celebrities and billionaires. But he hadn't anticipated Sophia treating Lena respectfully, rather than seeing her as a project. That unsettled him like things were already slipping beyond his control. He stepped forward, his voice cold and measured. "Is she doing all right, Sophia?" Sophia turned, unsurprised. "More than all right, Mr. Whitaker," she replied, her tone soft but sharp. "Miss Carter has potential far beyond what you think, but she'll need time." Lena turned, her gaze meeting James's. She didn't bow her head, didn't look away. "I'll play my part, Mr. Whitaker," she said, her voice even, with a trace of challenge. "But I won't pretend to be anyone but myself." James raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk forming. "I'm not asking you to change, Lena, to look like you belong." He turned and walked away, but inside, a strange feeling lingered. Lena Carter was unlike anyone he had ever met, making him both curious and uneasy. After James left, Sophia gently touched Lena's shoulder, her voice soft. "You'll do fine, Lena. But remember, this world doesn't define you. You define yourself." Lena nodded, though her heart felt heavy. She looked out the window where sunlight bathed the lush gardens and thought of her brothers. 3 months, she reminded herself. Just 3 months, and I'll be free. But as she looked into the mirror once more, seeing her reflection in the extravagant gown, she couldn't help but wonder, would she make it through this world without losing herself? Night had fallen over New York, neon lights from the skyscrapers reflecting off the glass facade of La Lumiere, an exclusive restaurant where the elite gathered to flaunt their power and wealth. Inside, the space shimmered with crystal chandeliers and white silk-covered tables, every detail exuding luxury. Lena Carter, dressed in the sparkling emerald green evening gown Sophia had chosen, entered the grand hall beside James Whitaker. She felt every gaze turned toward her, as if she were a painting being scrutinized in a gallery. At 28, Lena held her shoulders straight, her brown eyes steady with resolve, though her heart pounded in her chest. The gown hugged her figure and complemented her warm brown skin, but it also felt like an unfamiliar shell wrapped around her. She had spent the entire day with Sophia, learning to walk, hold a wine glass, and respond politely to small talk. But no lesson could prepare her for the piercing stares of those who saw her as an outsider. She lightly squeezed James's hand, not for comfort, but as a reminder to herself. She was doing this for Jamal and Marcus, her brothers waiting for her in Brooklyn. James, sharp in a tailored black suit, walked with his usual confidence. His icy blue eyes scanned the crowd, but he noticed the tension in how Lena gripped his hand. "Relax," he murmured, voice low and cool. "Just smile, and let me handle the rest." Lena glanced at him, her gaze sharp. "I don't need you to handle anything for me, Mr. Whitaker," she replied in a quiet but firm tone. "I'm here to do my part, not to be a prop." James raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk crossing his lips, but he said nothing. There was something in Lena's defiance that both irritated and intrigued him. He had expected obedience, but here she was, meeting him eye to eye with a dignity he wasn't used to encountering in his circle. They were led to a large table where Ethan Hayes and a few other high society friends were waiting. With his tousled brown hair and trademark sarcastic grin, Ethan stood up to greet James with a firm handshake. "James, you made it," he said, his eyes drifting to Lena. "And this must be Mrs. Whitaker?" His voice carried a mocking edge, making Lena clench her hands under the table. Sitting beside Ethan was Olivia Prescott, a white woman with perfectly styled golden curls and a tight red dress that showed off her curves. Olivia had once set her sights on James, and Lena's presence irritated her. "Oh, James," Olivia cooed sweetly, though her eyes were cold. "You always know how to surprise. Who is this? A new toy of yours?" The air around the table went taut like a drawn bow. Lena felt blood rush to her face, Olivia's words cutting like a knife. She inhaled deeply, recalling Sophia's advice. "They'll try to shake you, but you're stronger than they think." Lena lifted her chin and gave a subtle but razor-sharp smile. "I'm Lena Carter, James's wife," she said, her voice calm and clear. "And I'm no one's toy, Ms. Prescott. You should get to know someone before passing judgment." The table fell silent. Ethan chuckled, but it was strained like he hadn't expected Lena to bite back. Olivia blinked, clearly caught off guard, and her lips pressed into a thin line. James, seated beside Lena, looked at her with a flicker of surprise and admiration. He had been ready to step in, but Lena had handled it herself. And the way she did it, with poise and precision, made him see her differently. Ethan raised his glass as if to break the tension. "Interesting," he said, eyes locked on James. "You've picked someone unconventional, James. I'm curious to see how long she lasts in our world." Lena didn't answer. She lifted her wine glass and took a small sip, feeling the bitterness slide down her throat. She thought of her mother, who had once told her that self-worth is something no one could take from her. "They can say whatever they want," her mother used to say, "but you decide your value." Lena looked Ethan straight in the eyes, unwavering. "I'm not here to last long, Mr. Hayes," she said. "I'm here to do what I promised, and I'll do it better than you think." Olivia scoffed under her breath, but said nothing more. Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed, but unwilling to admit it. James felt something strange for the first time that evening. Not the control he always craved, but admiration. Lena hadn't just survived the scrutiny. She had turned it into her stage. The dinner continued with shallow conversations about real estate and European vacations, but Lena could still feel the eyes on her. She maintained her calm exterior, but inside, she was fighting. Every polite smile, every word, was a test. She thought of her brothers, of Marcus's drawings and Jamal's mischievous grin, to remind herself why she had to keep going. As dessert was served, James leaned slightly toward her, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You did well," he said, his tone hinting sincerity. "They didn't know how to handle you." Lena turned to him, her eyes still guarded. "I'm not doing this to impress them, Mr. Whitaker," she replied. "I'm doing this to keep a promise." She paused, then added more softly, "But thank you." James didn't respond, but something in him shifted. Lena Carter wasn't a pawn in a game he could control. She was fire, and though he didn't want to admit it, he was starting to feel its heat. As they left the restaurant, stepping out under Manhattan's glittering night sky, Lena took a deep breath, feeling like she had just climbed a mountain. She knew this was only the first test, and the road ahead would be even more challenging. But tonight, she had proven to herself and James that she would not be easily broken. Night blanketed the Whitaker estate. The pale moonlight filtered through the trees in the garden, casting dappled patterns of light and shadow across the stone pathway. Lena Carter sat on an old wooden bench beneath the large oak tree, clutching a worn brown leather notebook. Her natural curls fell freely over her shoulders, no longer neatly tied back as they were during work. Her brown eyes, usually sharp and alert, were now soft, tinged with an indescribable sadness. She turned the pages slowly, her fingers brushing over the scribbled drawings and handwritten notes as if searching for a lost piece of memory. Lena, 28, always kept this notebook with her, a memento from her mother, who used it to sketch dress patterns. After her mother's passing, Lena turned it into a journal of thoughts, dreams, and promises. She had drawn pictures of Jamal and Marcus, her two younger brothers, smiling brightly during their days together. Beneath each sketch were lines of writing, gentle reminders to herself. Promise to bring them home. Promise to give them a roof over their heads. But those promises now weighed heavily, especially as she remembered the day the court revoked her custody because she lacked the financial means. Lena inhaled deeply, trying to hold back tears. She was here, in James Whitaker's opulent world, not for him, but for the chance to keep those promises. From afar, James Whitaker stepped through the glass doors that opened into the garden, a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He hadn't been able to sleep, his mind still reeling from the dinner party at La Lumiere, where Lena had silenced an entire table with her sharp composure. He had stepped out for a walk to clear his unease, but seeing her there, sitting alone under the moonlight, made him pause. There was something about her stillness, or the way she held the notebook like a sacred secret that he couldn't look away from. James walked closer, his footsteps soft on the grass to avoid startling her. "It's late, Lena," he said, his voice low, not cold, like usual, but gentler. "You can't sleep?" Lena jumped slightly, quickly closing the notebook and tucking it into her coat pocket. She looked up, eyes wary. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, voice a little shaky. "I just needed some air." She stood, wiping her hands on her coat to hide her nervousness. "I'll head in now." James raised an eyebrow, his gaze resting on the pocket where the notebook had disappeared. "What were you reading?" he asked, his tone more curious than commanding. He realized he rarely asked Lena anything personal, and now he unexpectedly wanted to know. "Just some old stuff," Lena replied evasively, walking past him toward the glass door. "Good night, sir." She left quickly, leaving James standing there, his eyes still fixed on her retreating silhouette. That notebook, and how she had shielded it, stirred something intense in him, a curiosity he couldn't shake. It felt as if it held the key to truly understanding who Lena Carter was. The next morning, while Lena helped Sophia organize the upcoming event schedule, James sat alone in his office, still haunted by the image of Lena in the garden. He didn't understand why he cared. This was supposed to be a bet, a game to prove he could control anything. But Lena wasn't like the others in his world. She didn't bow her head. She didn't try to impress him. And that made her both infuriating and magnetic. When Lena left the estate with Sophia to pick out more outfits, James rose from his chair and stepped out of his office. He knew he shouldn't, but curiosity had won. He went upstairs to Lena's room. The oak door creaked softly as he opened it and stepped inside, feeling like he was intruding on something sacred. Her room was simpler than he expected. A few books on the desk, a small photo of two young boys pinned to the wall, and on the vanity beside a dried bouquet, the leather-bound notebook. James hesitated, his hand hovering over the notebook. He knew this was a violation, but he needed to understand why she had so thoroughly shaken his sense of control. He picked it up and opened the first page. Drawings unfolded before him. Two boys with radiant smiles, simple houses, and handwritten lines brimming with emotion. One page made him stop cold. A sketch of two boys holding hands, beneath which read, "Promise to protect them, no matter the cost." Another entry read, "Court day. I failed. But I won't give up." James felt his chest tighten. He turned more pages, reading notes about Lena's mother, about years spent working herself to the bone to care for her brothers, only to lose them because of a system that showed no mercy. He realized Lena wasn't just a maid. She was a sister, a fighter, a woman carrying scars he had never thought to imagine. The image of her at the dinner party, her steady gaze, her razor-sharp retort, now took on new meaning. She wasn't strong for herself. She was strong for them. He closed the notebook and carefully placed it back. But his mind was in turmoil. James Whitaker, the man who always had control, now felt small in the presence of someone like her. He thought of the bet with Ethan, how he had treated Lena like a piece in his game. His pride still wanted to win, but a part of him, buried and unfamiliar, began to wonder. If he kept playing this game, what might he lose? When Lena returned, she had no idea her secret had been touched. She resumed work, preparing for the following challenges in James's world. But James, sitting alone in his office, staring out at the garden where he had seen her the night before, knew everything had changed. Lena Carter was no longer just a part of the bet. She was becoming a question he wasn't sure he could answer. Late at night at the Whitaker estate, soft yellow light from a desk lamp spilled across stacks of documents and a glowing laptop screen in James Whitaker's office. James, sleeves rolled up on his white dress shirt, leaned back in his leather chair, his tired blue eyes staring at a financial chart. But his mind was elsewhere. The image of Lena Carter's notebook, its sketches and handwritten promises, continued to haunt him. He rubbed his forehead, trying to shake the guilt of violating her privacy. But the harder he tried, the more he realized he couldn't stop thinking about her. Downstairs, after a long day of working with Sophia to prepare for upcoming events, Lena padded into the main hallway of the estate, carrying a small tray with a cup of herbal tea. She had noticed James working late several nights in a row, the light from his office seeping through the cracks beneath the door. She didn't know what compelled her. Perhaps the instinct of a big sister who had spent years caring for others. But she decided to bring him tea. She knocked softly, her voice calm but clear. "Mr. Whitaker, I brought you some tea." James looked up from the screen, startled. "Lena." He furrowed his brow, surprised. "Come in." He wasn't used to her appearing unannounced, and her initiative intrigued him. Lena stepped inside with the tray. The desk lamp lit her face, highlighting the warmth of her brown skin and the depth of her dark eyes. She wore a simple sweater, her natural curls loose, far from the high society image Sophia was trying to craft. She set the tea down near a pile of documents. "You looked like you needed a break," she said softly but sincerely. "This tea helps you relax. I used to make it for my family." James eyed the steaming cup, the scent of mint drifting upward. He raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You think I need your concern, Lena?" he asked with a touch of teasing, but without his usual arrogance. Lena crossed her arms, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm not concerned," she replied, her tone dry with a hint of sarcasm. "I don't want you to collapse before our contract ends." She paused, then added more gently, "But working yourself to death never helped anyone. Trust me, I know." James studied her, realizing for the first time how tired she looked, as if she were speaking from hard-earned experience. He thought of the notebook, the lines she wrote about years of grueling labor to care for her brothers. He picked up the tea and took a sip. The mint washed over him, surprisingly calming. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but genuine. "Sit down, Lena, since you're here." Lena hesitated, then pulled out the chair across from him and sat. The air between them shifted, no longer bound by the cold edges of a contract, but filled with mutual curiosity, hesitant yet genuine. She ran a hand through her hair, eyes glancing around the lavish office. "What are you working on so late?" she asked, trying to break the silence. James shrugged, setting the cup down. "Just numbers. Deals. The things that keep this world spinning." He paused, then looked at her. "And you? What would you be doing if it weren't for this arrangement?" The question caught Lena off guard. She looked down at her hands, fingers woven tightly. No one in James's world had ever asked her that, as if a maid's dreams weren't worth knowing. She drew a breath and answered, her voice quiet but confident. "I want to open a community center in Brooklyn, a place for kids like my brothers, to study, to draw, or feel safe. I promised my mom I'd make that happen." James didn't respond right away. He stared at her, the image of the notebook flashing through his mind, the drawings, the promises, now taking on new life. A wave stirred in him, as if her simple dream contrasted his cold, calculating world. "That's a big dream," he said, his voice steady. "Not easy to pull off." Lena gave a faint smile, eyes tinged with quiet resolve. "Nothing's easy, Mr. Whitaker, but I've learned not to give up." She met his gaze. "What about you? What do you dream of, besides money and power?" Her question cut like a knife. James chuckled, but it was dry, bitter. He turned away, looking out the dark window. "You think I don't have dreams?" he said softly. "When I was growing up, my father told me only one thing mattered: winning. Everything else, feelings, dreams, was a weakness. I've lived by that rule since I was a kid." Lena tilted her head, her expression softening. She thought of her mother, who had always said love was the greatest strength. "Sounds like you grew up in a lonely world," she said gently. "Your father was wrong. Winning means nothing if there's no one to share it with." James turned back to her. Their eyes met. Her words touched something deep within him, a place he rarely acknowledged. He remembered his mother, soft-spoken and fragile, always submitting to his father's will. He had taught himself to lock away emotion, but now, sitting across from Lena, those walls trembled. "You talk like you know me," he said, with a trace of sarcasm. Yet his eyes revealed a genuine curiosity. Lena shrugged and stood. "I don't know you, Mr. Whitaker, but I know what it means to live for others. You should try it sometime." She gave him a small smile, both a challenge and a kindness, then walked out of the office, leaving James with the still warm cup of tea. James sat there, watching the door close. He took another sip, letting the mint spread through him. Lena's words echoed in his mind, like a question he couldn't answer. He thought again of the bet with Ethan, of how he had treated her like a pawn. But she was no longer part of the game. She was a person, with dreams and wounds, making him feel smaller than he had ever felt. Upstairs, Lena sat on her bed, hugging the notebook. She didn't know why she had shared her dream with James. But something in him, a flicker of pain beneath the pride, had made her feel he wasn't entirely the cold man she thought he was. She flipped to the page with the sketch of Jamal and Marcus and whispered, "I'll do it for you." But in her heart, a new question had begun to take shape. Could James Whitaker truly change? Or was he just another part of the world she would never belong to? Night had fallen over Manhattan, the lights of skyscrapers blending with the dazzling glow of the ballroom inside the Grand Regency Hotel, where New York's elite gathered for their annual high society ball. The grand hall gleamed with marble columns, colossal crystal chandeliers, and a live orchestra playing soft waltzes. In a shimmering silver evening gown, Lena Carter walked in beside James Whitaker, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes turning to her. The dress, meticulously chosen by Sophia Bennett, hugged her frame and brought out the warmth of her brown skin and sharp features. But Lena still felt like she was stepping onto a stage she had never been invited to. At 28, Lena held her chin high, her brown eyes lit with determination, though her heart pounded. She had survived the dinner at La Lumiere, but this ball was entirely different. This was where power and prestige were paraded, where every gesture and word was judged. She gave James's arm a light squeeze, not for comfort, but to remind herself why she was here. Jamal and Marcus, her younger brothers, are waiting in Brooklyn. "They're going to stare," James whispered, his voice low but not cold as usual. "Let them. You've already done better than they expected." Lena glanced at him, surprised by the rare encouragement. "I'm not here to please them, Mr. Whitaker," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "But I won't let them think I'm someone who bows easily." James offered a faint smile, a flicker of admiration in his blue eyes. He said nothing more, but inside, he knew he was beginning to see Lena in an entirely new light. They moved into the crowd, where tuxedos and ball gowns spun across the polished dance floor. Ethan Hayes emerged from a cluster of guests, his familiar smirk in place, a champagne flute in hand. "James, Lena," he greeted, his tone tinged with mockery. "Quite a surprise seeing you here. I thought Miss Carter might struggle with events like this." Lena felt heat rise to her face, but she kept her composure. "Mr. Hayes," she said evenly, "I find it easier to adapt than to remain polite in situations like this." Ethan chuckled, but his eyes narrowed, clearly irritated. James remained silent, his gaze fixed on Lena, waiting to see how she'd handle it. The orchestra shifted into a slow waltz. James extended his hand. "Dance with me," he said, voice low, with a subtle challenge. Lena hesitated, recalling her rushed dance lessons with Sophia. She wasn't good at waltzing, but something in James's eyes, less a command, more an invitation, made her nod. She placed her hand in his, and together, they stepped onto the dance floor among the swirling high society couples. At first, Lena felt the eyes like needles. Her steps were a little clumsy, not quite in rhythm, but James led her confidently, his hand steady at her waist. "Look at me," he whispered. "Forget them." Lena looked up, locking eyes with his, and for a moment, it felt like they were the only two in the room. She inhaled deeply then. Surprisingly, she shifted the rhythm, taking the lead momentarily. Her steps grew stronger, as if declaring her presence in the room. The crowd began to murmur, but Lena didn't care. She thought of her mother, who once told her that strength was standing tall even when the world tried to push you down. She thought of Jamal and Marcus, their smiles, their hope, and knew she could not falter. Her movements grew graceful and assertive. James, caught off guard by her confidence, smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "You're surprising me, Lena," he murmured, voice warm for once. As the dance ended, they stood in the center of the floor, slightly breathless. Applause followed, not necessarily sincere, but loud. Ethan stepped forward, clapping slowly, his smirk never fading. "Impressive, Miss Carter," he said, "but I wonder, do you belong here? Or is this just a well-rehearsed performance?" The air tightened like a stretched wire. Lena felt the sting of his words flare like fire in her chest, but her voice remained calm, her eyes razor-sharp. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I'm not here to belong to your world. I'm here because I chose to be here. And if you think this is all an act, you should look in the mirror. Living to judge others must be exhausting." Silence fell over the nearby group. A few guests covered their mouths to hide smiles. Ethan blinked, clearly stunned that Lena had answered so directly. James, beside her, couldn't hide his admiration. He had been ready to step in, but once again, Lena proved she didn't need protecting. An older gentleman stepped forward, Mr. Charles Langley, a well-known tycoon. He nodded at Lena. "You're right, Miss Carter," he said, his voice deep. "Being true to oneself is rare in a place like this. I hope we meet again." Lena nodded gently. "Thank you, Mr. Langley." She turned to James, her eyes showing a flicker of weariness, though her posture remained unshaken. "I need some air," she said, and walked toward the balcony, leaving James and Ethan in the crowd. James watched her go, admiration mixing with unease. Lena hadn't just survived the ball, but made it to her stage. And that unsettled him. Ethan patted his shoulder, voice low. "She's going to be a problem, James. Can you handle that?" James didn't respond. He brushed Ethan's hand off, his gaze still following Lena. He thought of their conversation in the office, her dream, the notebook filled with promises. The bet with Ethan now felt like a mistake, not because he feared losing, but because, for the first time, he feared losing something far more critical. Lena stood alone on the balcony, breathing in the cool night air and gazing at the glittering Manhattan skyline. She thought of her brothers and mother, and reminded herself that she would endure. But as she turned and saw James standing at the balcony doorway, his gaze no longer cold, but contemplative, she couldn't help but wonder. Was he truly the man she thought he was? Or could he become something more? A light rain fell over the cobblestone paths of the Whitaker estate's garden, the soft patter mingling with the whisper of night winds. Inside, the grand hall still glowed with the brilliance of crystal chandeliers, but the atmosphere had shifted, heavy, foreboding, like the calm before a storm. Lena Carter stood in a simple sweater and jeans near the oak staircase, having just returned from a long day with Sophia, preparing for the next event. She was tired, but part of her had grown used to this strange rhythm of life. The recent moments with James Whitaker, the conversation in his office, the dance at the ball, had made her wonder if something was real between them, or if it was all just part of the contract. In his office, James sat behind his desk, his deep blue eyes clouded with thought. Lena's notebook, her dreams, and how she had stood her ground at the ball had shaken something inside him, cracks in the fortress he had built around his heart. He thought about the bet with Ethan Hayes, and for the first time, it felt more like a burden than a game. He wanted to tell Lena, to explain, but his pride held him back every time he tried. The doorbell rang, sharp, urgent, and unrelenting, shattering the silence of the estate. Lena looked up from the hall, a wave of unease rising. She heard the footsteps of the butler, Mr. Henry, heading toward the entrance. "I'll see who it is," he said in his deep voice. But James appeared from the corridor before he could reach the door, his eyes tense. "I'll handle it," he said, gesturing for Henry to step aside. The door opened, and Ethan Hayes stepped in. His tousled brown hair was soaked with rain, and his familiar smirk now carried something more menacing. He held a briefcase, water dripping down his expensive leather coat. "James," Ethan said coldly, "we need to talk. Now." Lena, standing at the corner of the hall, eyed Ethan warily. She had never seen him like this, less mocking, more furious. James crossed his arms, his tone calm but sharp. If you've got something to say it here, Ethan. I don't have time for your games. Ethan glanced at Lena, his smile turning cruel. Oh, Miss Carter should hear this too. He opened the briefcase, pulled a document, and tossed it onto the foyer table. Do you know why you're here, Lena? Why did James suddenly decide to marry someone like you? Lena's heart clenched. Someone like you. The words landed like a blow, but she kept her composure, her gaze fixed on Ethan. Say it clearly, Mr. Hayes, she said, voice steady, though her hands trembled. James stepped forward, his eyes darkening. Ethan, that's enough, he said, warning in his tone. But Ethan ignored him, stepping closer to Lena and holding the paper up. This is the betting contract, he said, voice laced with venom. James bet me $5 million he could marry you, a maid, someone completely outside our world, and keep you at his side for 3 months, transforming you into a high society lady. It was all a game, Lena. You were just a pawn. The hall froze in time. Lena felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She stared at the paper on the table, the faint lines of text catching the light, just clear enough to see her name, and James's signature. She turned to him, eyes wide with betrayal. Is it true? She asked, her voice breaking. All of it was a bet? James opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He wanted to deny it, to explain. But the raw truth in Ethan's words left no room for defense. Lena, he began, but her eyes, filled with pain and fury, stopped him cold. Lena let out a bitter laugh, tears glistening, though she refused to let them fall. I thought you were different, she said, her voice trembling. I thought, just for a moment, that there was something real between us. But you were playing a game, weren't you? It was just another way for you to prove your power. Lena, it wasn't like that, James said, stepping forward. But she raised a hand to stop him. Don't, she said, voice cold. Don't come any closer. Ethan stood by, victorious. I told you, James, he said smugly. She doesn't belong here. And now, it seems, you've lost. He turned and walked out into the rain, leaving the briefcase behind. The door slamming shut echoed like a period on a cruel sentence. Lena stared at James, her heart breaking. She thought of the moments they had shared, the tea in the office, the dance at the ball, and felt it had all been a lie. She thought of Jamal and Marcus, the promise she had clung to in her heart, and wondered if she had been foolish to believe she could survive in this world without getting hurt. I can't stay here, she said quietly but firmly. She turned and climbed the stairs, each step heavy with the world's weight. Lena, please, listen to me, James called after her, his voice unsteady for the first time. I know I was wrong, but I care about you. Truly. But Lena didn't look back. She entered her room, shut the door, and began to pack. She tucked her notebook into her bag, her eyes sweeping over the luxurious room she had never truly belonged to. The tears finally fell, but she wiped them away, unwilling to let James see her weakness. James stood in the hall downstairs, staring up at the empty stairs. He felt he had lost something he hadn't even known he valued. He picked up the paper Ethan had left behind and crushed it in his hand. The bet, once his pride, now felt like a curse. He knew he had done wrong. But worse than the bet itself was realizing Lena was not just a pawn. She was the one person who had made him want to become someone better. Lena left the estate in the rain, refusing James's offer to call a car. She walked through the gate, the street lamp casting a glow across her rain-soaked face. She didn't know where she was going, but knew she had to leave. Leave James Whitaker and the world that had turned her into a joke. But inside her, a fire still burned. She would not break. For Jamal and Marcus, she would keep fighting. James stood in the foyer, watching through the window as Lena's figure disappeared into the storm. For the first time, he felt what it truly meant to lose. Not money, not status, but someone who mattered more than any victory he'd ever won. Once alight with laughter and chandeliers, the Whitaker estate now lay in a heavy, languid silence. The rain had stopped, but a damp chill still lingered in the air, mirroring the weight pressing down on James Whitaker's chest. He sat in his office, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating the dark circles under his blue eyes. Before him lay the crumpled betting contract with Ethan Hayes, creased and worn from the fury he had gripped it. Lena Carter had left 3 days ago. Her absence had carved a void in the mansion that James hadn't expected. Though still grand, the estate now felt hollow, an echo chamber of regret. At 35, James had never known defeat like this. He had built an empire and won every negotiation, but now he realized none mattered. Not when he hurt Lena. The moments they'd shared, tea in his office, the dance at the gala, her notebook full of promises, played in his mind like a haunting melody. He thought of his father, who always preached that emotions were weakness. But for the first time, James wondered if his father had been wrong. He rose and walked to the window, gazing at the garden where Lena once sat under the moonlight. That morning, he had called Sophia Bennett, the stylist who had grown close to Lena. Her words still echoed in his head. "Lena's not just a maid, James," Sophia had said firmly. She worked 2 jobs to raise her brothers, slept 4 hours a night, and still smiled at everyone. She's stronger than anyone in your world. If you want to make this right, don't just talk. Do something that matters. Her words had struck like lightning. James opened his laptop and searched for local charities in Brooklyn. He remembered Lena's dream, a community center for underprivileged children, and decided. He contacted a foundation and transferred the $5 million from the betting contract to a new project, a community center in the Brooklyn neighborhood where Lena's brothers lived. He wanted no part of that money. It was stained with guilt. It belonged to something real. The next day, James visited the Brooklyn neighborhood, a place he had never set foot in. He wore a plain shirt, no suit, no tie. The narrow streets, chipped paint on the walls, and the laughter of children playing tugged at something deep in him. He met Ms. Elaine, a longtime community organizer, who guided him through the area. "We need a place for the kids to learn, to create," she said, her eyes lighting up when she heard of the donation. "But money isn't enough. You have to care, honestly." James nodded, and inside, he knew he was learning that from Lena. He joined a volunteer meeting that afternoon, awkwardly helping hand out books and toys. A little boy with eyes that reminded James of Marcus from one of Lena's sketches ran up and asked, "Who are you? Are you staying to help us?" James smiled softly. The child's innocent question pierced him. He didn't just want to atone. He wanted to become someone worthy of Lena's respect. Meanwhile, Lena had moved into a small room at a boarding house on the outskirts of Brooklyn, trying to rebuild her life. She worked at a small cafe, wiping tables and serving coffee, though her mind often drifted back to the Whitaker estate. James's betrayal still burned, but so did the memory of his eyes during their dance, his voice when he spoke of his father. She found herself wondering, was he truly as cold as she believed, or had she missed something deeper? One afternoon during her break, Sophia walked into the cafe, still razor-sharp in a gray tailored suit. She sat across from Lena. "Lena," she said softly, "I need to talk to you about James." Lena frowned, her tone wary. She said, "I don't want to hear about him," but her voice lacked its usual steel. Sophia tilted her head, eyes full of empathy. He donated $5 million from the bet to fund a community center in Brooklyn. He's working with the volunteers, meeting people you used to talk about, people who need to be heard. I'm not saying he's blameless, Lena, but he's trying. And I think he's doing it because of you. Lena was silent, her fingers tightening around the dish rag in her hand. She thought about her notebook, about her dream, and wondered, had James truly changed? Why is he doing this? She asked in a small voice. To make amends, or to feel better about himself? Sophia shrugged. Only he knows the answer to that. But I've seen him clumsily handing out books to kids, and I've never seen James Whitaker like that. Maybe you should give him the chance to explain. Lena didn't reply. She returned to work, but Sophia's words echoed in her mind. She thought of Jamal and Marcus, of the years she had struggled alone. If James was changing, could she open her heart again? But the sting of betrayal was still there, like a wound that hadn't closed. That night, James returned to the estate and sat in his office, staring at a photo Lena had left behind. A small picture of her with her brothers, once pinned to her bedroom wall. The sight stirred something urgent in him. He picked up his phone and called Sophia. "Where is she staying?" he asked. "She works at a cafe in Brooklyn," Sophia replied. "But James, if you go to her, go with sincerity. Lena doesn't need words, she needs action." James nodded, though she couldn't see it. He looked out at the garden, where Lena once sat with her dreams in hand. He knew he had hurt her, but he also knew he couldn't let her walk away without trying to make it right. With newfound resolve, James rose, grabbed his coat, and headed for Brooklyn. He didn't know if she would forgive him, but he was ready to do whatever it took, to prove he was no longer the man who made that bet. A small cafe on the outskirts of Brooklyn, with old wooden tables and the scent of roasted coffee lingering in the air, was where Lena Carter found a bit of peace after leaving the Whitaker estate. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass windows, casting a warm glow on her face as she wiped down a table recently vacated by customers. Lena, 28, in a dark blue apron and her curly hair tied high, moved with familiar focus, but her brown eyes held a sadness she couldn't hide. It had been a week since she left James Whitaker, yet the pain of betrayal still felt like a fresh wound. Lena was trying to rebuild her life, but her mind kept drifting back to moments with James. The teacup he held in his office, how he looked at her during their dance at the ball, and the tremble in his voice when he begged her to stay. Sophia Bennett's words, that James had donated $5 million to a community center and was working with the kids in Brooklyn, made her waver. She wanted to believe he had changed, but the fear of being hurt again kept her heart guarded. That afternoon, when the cafe was quiet, Lena sat at the corner of the counter and opened her old laptop. She had saved enough to buy a cheap computer, and now she used it to stay in touch with Aunt Ruth, caring for her two younger brothers, Jamal and Marcus, in Brooklyn. She opened the video call app, her heart racing as Aunt Ruth's face appeared on the screen, silver hair neatly tied back and a warm smile on her face. "Lena, are you doing okay?" Aunt Ruth asked, her voice full of concern. "I'm fine, Auntie," Lena replied, smiling, though her eyes betrayed a hint of sorrow. "How are Jamal and Marcus? Do they ever talk about me?" She bit her lip, dreading the answer. It had been 3 years since she lost custody of her brothers, and although she sent money every month, she always worried they thought she had abandoned them. Aunt Ruth nodded, her gaze gentle. "They talk about you every day, Lena. Marcus just drew a picture for you, and Jamal keeps asking when you'll visit." She turned the camera, and Lena saw the two boys sitting on a worn-out couch in a cramped apartment. Marcus, 12, with bright eyes and a mischievous smile. waved. "Sis Lena!" he exclaimed. Jamal, 15, tried to appear calm, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "You okay?" he asked, a bit shyly. Tears welled up in Lena's eyes, but she smiled and wiped them away quickly. "I'm okay, boys," she said, her voice trembling. "I miss you so much." "Marcus, where's your drawing? Let me see it." Marcus held up a piece of paper with a drawing of a house and 3 people standing before it. Below, it read, "Lena, me, and Jamal." Lena felt her heart tighten. "It's beautiful, Marcus," she said, voice choked. "I'll bring you home soon. I promise." Jamal tilted his head, his gaze more mature than his age. "Sis, you work too much. Don't wear yourself out, okay?" His words cut deep, reminding Lena of the years she worked to exhaustion to support them, only to lose them to the system. She nodded softly. "I'll take care of myself, Jamal. You boys focus on school. Let me handle the rest." After the call ended, Lena sat there, clutching her leather-bound notebook and flipping to the page with Marcus and Jamal's drawing. She thought about her promise to return them and wondered if she was strong enough to keep it. James's betrayal made her question everything, but his recent actions, donating money and working with the community, made her wonder if he truly regretted what he had done. The cafe door jingled, and Sophia Bennett walked in, still in her sharp gray suit and subtle smile. Lena stood up, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes guarded. "Sophia," she said, "here to talk about James again?" Sophia sat at the counter, motioning for Lena to join her. "I'm here for you, Lena," she said sincerely. "But I can't not mention him. James has changed, Lena. He's not just donating money. He's in Brooklyn daily, talking to the kids and learning to listen. I've never seen him like this." Lena folded her arms, her expression uncertain. "So what? Is he doing it to redeem himself or to get my forgiveness? I don't want to be part of a game again, Sophia." Sophia tilted her head, her eyes sharp yet empathetic. "I know you're hurt, Lena, but I also saw the way you looked at him at the ball. There's something between you two. You feels it too. James was wrong, but he's trying to make it right. The question is, are you willing to give him a chance, or will you let the pain define your future?" Sophia's words struck like cold water. Lena turned away, looking out the window, where sunlight lit up the bustling street. She thought of her mother, who always told her that forgiveness wasn't weakness, but strength. She thought of her brothers, of the house in Marcus's drawing, and wondered if she could build that life without opening her heart. "I need time," Lena said quietly. "I don't know if I can trust him." Sophia nodded, placing a hand on Lena's shoulder. "Take your time, Lena, but don't shut your heart completely. You deserve happiness, and I believe James could be a part of that, if he proves it." She stood up, leaving behind a business card. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." Lena picked up the card, her fingers brushing over the text. She returned to work, but her mind was in turmoil. She thought of James, of the look in his eyes when she walked away, and wondered if he was truly the man she met in that office that night, who spoke of his father. The man looked at her as if she were his whole world. She opened her notebook and wrote a new line. "Is forgiveness worth it? Or am I just fooling myself?" Lena lay on the bed in her cramped, rented room that night, staring at the peeling ceiling. She thought about the call with her brothers, Sophia's words, and James. She didn't know if she could forgive, but she felt a flicker of hope for the first time. Not because of James, but because of herself. She knew she was strong enough to face the past, and maybe, just maybe, strong enough to give him a chance. Dusk fell over Brooklyn, the golden hue of sunset washing over the dusty streets, where Lena Carter's small cafe stood as a warm beacon amid the bustling crowd. In her dark blue apron, Lena wiped down the counter with practiced motions, but her mind was still a whirlwind. The video call with Jamal and Marcus the previous week, along with Sophia's words about the changes in James Whitaker, had left her unable to stop thinking about him. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but a small flicker of hope that James might truly be remorseful had begun to take root in her heart. At 28, Lena gazed out the window, where the light caught on children playing ball on the sidewalk. She thought of her dream, a community center for kids like Jamal and Marcus, where they could learn, draw, and dream. She opened her leather-bound notebook and turned to her latest entry. Is forgiveness worth it? She didn't have an answer yet, but her mother's words, "Forgiveness is strength, not weakness," echoed in her mind, making her hesitate. The cafe's bell jingled, pulling Lena from her thoughts. She looked up, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw James Whitaker walk in. He wore a simple navy blue shirt, no suit, no tie, looking worlds apart from the arrogant millionaire she once knew. His blue eyes carried fatigue, but also determination. A large paper bag was in his hand, and behind him was a small group of neighborhood children, each holding a new book. "Lena," James said, his voice low but sincere, "I need to talk to you." He paused, glancing around the cafe as if searching for the right way to begin. Lena crossed her arms, her gaze guarded. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, her voice calm but cold. "What are you doing here?" She glanced at the children, recognizing a few familiar faces from the neighborhood, and a mix of unease and curiosity rose in her chest. James placed the paper bag on the counter and gestured for the children to sit at a nearby table. "I brought them books," he said gently. "They heard about the community center being built and wanted to thank you. You're the inspiration for this project, Lena." Lena blinked, surprised. "Me?" she asked, her voice slightly shaky. She looked at the children, one boy holding up an art book with a bright smile. "Miss Lena." "Mr. James said you want to build a place where we can draw," the boy exclaimed. Lena felt her chest tighten. She looked at James, her gaze torn between skepticism and emotion. James said, "I didn't mean to intrude," stepping closer, but keeping a respectful distance. "I want you to know that I regret it. I was wrong, Lena. The way I treated you was the best, and I'm trying to make things right." He paused, his eyes earnest. "I donated the betting money to the community center, and I'm working with them every day. Not to earn your forgiveness, but because I finally see you were right. Life isn't just about money or power." Lena was silent, her hand gripping the cloth tightly. She thought of the days at the estate, James's eyes when they danced, and the awkward way he had shared about his father. She wanted to believe him, but the pain still stood like a wall. "You think a few books and a community center can erase what you did?" she asked, her voice sharp but trembling. "You made me a joke, James." James lowered his head, his expression filled with remorse. "I know," he said quietly. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want you to see that I'm trying. Not because of the bet, but because you changed how I see the world. You make me want to be a better man." His words touched Lena's heart, but she kept her exterior firm. She turned away, watching the children flip through their books, their laughter ringing through the cafe. She thought of Marcus and his drawings and wondered if she could turn down this opportunity, not just for herself, but for kids like her brothers. "I need time," she said softly, "but I'll see your project. Not for you, for the kids." James nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Thank you, Lena," he said. "This Saturday, in the projects. I'll be waiting." On Saturday, Lena stood in front of a building under renovation in Brooklyn, soon to become a community center. She wore a t-shirt and jeans, her notebook tucked in her pocket, eyes scanning the workers and volunteers. James was there, sleeves rolled up, helping a group of kids paint a wall with colorful designs. He held the brush awkwardly, paint smeared on his face, but his sincere and warm smile made Lena freeze in place. Mrs. Elaine, a local community organizer, approached Lena with a smile. She said, "Miss Carter, I hear you're the inspiration behind this project. Mr. Whitaker can't stop talking about you." Lena gave a faint smile, her gaze still fixed on James. He turned and saw her. His smile lit up. He walked over, wiping his hands on his shirt, speaking gently. "You came." Lena nodded, her eyes wavering. "She said I wanted to see what you're doing to the kids." But as she looked at James, no longer the arrogant millionaire, but a man genuinely trying, she felt the wall inside her tremble. She thought of her mother and her promise to her brothers, and wondered if forgiveness might be part of that journey. James led her through the building, pointing to the classrooms and creative spaces. "I want this place to be what you dreamed of," he said sincerely. "Not to redeem myself, but because I believe in it." Lena didn't respond, but her gaze softened. She knew she wasn't ready to forgive him. But for the first time, she saw a different James Whitaker, a man who might be worthy of her trust. The garden behind the Whitaker estate, once the place where Lena Carter sat silently clutching her notebook under the moonlight, had now been transformed into a dreamlike setting. Twinkling string lights hung from the branches of an ancient oak tree, forming a gentle canopy of light. A pathway covered in white rose petals led to a floral arch decorated with red and white roses. Beneath it stood a small table with 2 chairs, a bottle of wine, and 2 sparkling glasses. In a simple yet elegant pale blue dress, Lena stood at the start of the path, her brown eyes filled with surprise as James Whitaker guided her into the garden. At 28, Lena felt her heart racing. She had agreed to return to the estate after their encounter at the community center in Brooklyn, where she had watched James clumsily but earnestly work with the children. His sincerity and the changes Sophia and Mrs. Elaine had described began to shake the walls she had built after his betrayal. Yet she was not ready to fully trust him. She looked at James in a white shirt and slacks, his blue eyes glowing with a sincerity she had never seen before. "Lena," James said, his voice deep and slightly trembling as he led her to the arch. "Thank you for coming. I wanted you to see this." He gestured toward the table, but his eyes never left her, as if she were the center of his universe. Lena tilted her head, her gaze wavering between curiosity and caution. "James, what is all this?" she asked softly. "Another performance?" But her faint smile carried a teasing tone, as if she were testing him. James shook his head, smiling gently. "It's not a performance," he said. "This is something I need to do for you." He took her hand, led her to the table, and pulled out a chair for her. Lena sat down, eyes scanning the glowing garden, her heart torn between old pain and new hope. James sat across from her, pouring wine into their glasses, though his hand trembled slightly. He took a deep breath, locking eyes with her. "Lena, I was wrong. The bet with Ethan was the biggest mistake of my life. I treated you like a game, but you changed me. You showed me that life isn't about winning or power. You made me want to be a better man. Not just for you, but for myself." Lena said nothing, her hand tightening around the wine glass. She thought of the days at the estate, the teacup in the office, their dance at the ball, and the pain of learning the truth. She thought of her mother, who had taught her that love and forgiveness required courage. "James," she said softly, "you hurt me. I don't know if I can forget." James nodded, his eyes full of remorse. "I don't expect you to forget," he said. "But I hope you allow me to prove I'm not that man anymore. You taught me that real worth lies in people, in you, your brothers, and the kids in Brooklyn." He paused, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket, and Lena's heart seemed to stop. He knelt before her, opening the box to reveal a simple yet elegant ring with a glistening pearl. "Lena Carter," he said, voice shaking but steady. "I don't want you to be my wife because of a contract or a bet. I want you to be my wife because I love you. I want to build a life with you based on respect, trust, and true love. Will you marry me? This time? For real?" Tears welled in Lena's eyes, streaming down her cheeks. She looked into James's eyes and saw sincerity, vulnerability, and a love she once didn't dare believe in. She thought of Jamal and Marcus, the house in their drawing, and the promise she had kept in her heart. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but she knew she was strong enough to try. "James," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "I don't know if I can forget the past, but I want to believe you. And I love you too." James smiled, his eyes lighting up like never before. He slipped the ring onto her finger, stood, and embraced her tightly. Beneath the floral arch, under the shimmering lights, they stood together as if the world around them had faded away. 2 months later, the Whitaker estate garden bloomed again for a real wedding. Lena walked down the flower-lined aisle in a white gown embroidered with delicate patterns, her curly hair adorned with tiny white blossoms. Beside her were Jamal and Marcus, reunited for the first time in 3 years, thanks to the contract settlement money that allowed Lena to regain custody. In their little suits, the 2 boys held her hands, grinning brightly. James stood at the end of the aisle in a black suit, his eyes lighting up as he saw Lena. Beside him stood Sophia Bennett, now Lena's close friend, and Mrs. Elaine, the community organizer, along with volunteers and children from Brooklyn. As Lena approached, James took her hand, his voice choked with emotion as he spoke his vows. "Lena, you are the best thing that's ever happened to me. I promise to love, respect, and stand by you. In good times. Thank you for giving me the chance to become a better man." Lena, her eyes shimmering with tears, replied, "James, you showed me that love takes courage. I promise to walk beside you and build our life together." When the officiant declared them husband and wife, James pulled Lena into a kiss, and the crowd erupted in applause as flower petals danced through the air. The reception that followed was filled with laughter, music, and dancing. Jamal and Marcus played with the Brooklyn kids, while Lena and James danced under the lights. Lena looked at James and felt a peace she had never known. She had kept her promise to her brothers, and now she was building a future with the man she loved.